My mom convinced my girlfriend to marry my brother, saying he was stronger and better for her. I was heartbroken and devastated when I returned and saw what had happened, but I left town to build my life. When I returned, everything was different. Hello, thank you for your constant support. It means a lot to us. If you like the stories we share, please subscribe to this channel. It would be great if you could leave a comment about which city you are watching from. Maybe we'll mention you in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Terry Lawson from South Africa. We're glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. My name is Alvin, and I think you could say my story began the day everything I thought I had crumbled. Back then, I was just a guy from a small town called Harriston, a place where everyone knows your business before you do. I was 23, working at a hardware store, stacking boards and punching nails for people who had known me since I was in diapers. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I had Lily. She was my world. Dark hair that never fell in waves, a laugh that made the air lighter. We had been together for 2 years, and I was saving up for a ring. Nothing fancy, just something to put on her finger and say, "Manny, you're mine and I'm yours." That summer, I had the opportunity to make some extra money. A buddy got me a 3-week gig hauling hay an hour out of town. It was tough work. Sweat soaked my shirt, and dust clogged my throat. But every time I tossed a bale, I pictured Lily's face. I called her at night from a creaky payphone by the bunkhouse, her voice soft and sweet through the static. "I miss you," she said, and I smiled like a fool, counting the days until I returned. I didn't know my mom was counting the days too, but for a different reason. When I returned to Harriston, my truck rumbled down Main Street, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I had made enough to open a savings account, maybe even take Lily somewhere nice. I stopped by her place first, a small house with peeling paint and flowers she had planted blooming in front. But when I knocked, her mom opened the door, lips pursed as if she had bitten into a lemon. "She's not here, Alvin," she said, barely looking at me. "You better talk to your family." My heart sank and I drove home, dust trailing behind me into chaos. My mom, Margaret, was in the kitchen, flowers on her apron, barking orders at my brother James like a general. James, all 6'3" of him, lounged against the counter, smirking. Then I saw it. A cheap gold ring on his finger, nothing like the one I had dreamed of. "Where's Lily?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. Mom turned, wiping her hands as if brushing me off. "She's with James now, Alvin. They're engaged. It's over." The room spun, and I looked at James, his smirk widening as if he had won some prize. "What are you talking about?" I said, stepping closer. "Calm down," Mom snapped. "Lily needs a man, not a boy chasing unattainable dreams. James is strong, reliable, he has a future. You're just—" Her words stung like a slap. I had spent my life trying to make her proud, fixing the porch when it sagged, working overtime so she wouldn't worry about the bills. And James, he just coasted along, relying on his looks and charm, never lifting a finger unless it benefited him. Now he had Lily. I stormed out, tires screeching as I drove to Lily's. This time she was home, sitting on the porch swing, eyes red. "Is it true?" I asked. She nodded, wringing her hands. "Your mom said you'd never be good enough, that James could take care of me. I didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to do." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You could have waited 3 weeks. You could have called me." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and part of me wanted to hug her, say it would be okay. But another part, the one that saw James's smirk and heard Mom's voice, knew it was over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I said nothing, just turned around and left, her sobs fading behind me. That night I sat in my room, looking at the walls I'd grown up on. Pictures of us as kids, James and me fishing, Mom smiling at a picnic. All seemed like lies. I was no longer their family. I was the spare, the one discarded when something shinier came along. By morning, I had made a decision. I packed a bag, a sack of clothes, a toothbrush, $50 left from the hay job. Mom was in the living room when I came downstairs, knitting as if nothing had happened. "You're leaving?" she asked, not even looking up. Anywhere but here, I said. She didn't stop me. James wasn't around, probably somewhere boasting. I got into my truck and drove. The town shrank in the rearview mirror, and I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew one thing. I won't let them break me again. And so it began, the day I lost everything and decided to build something they couldn't touch. Driving away from Harriston, I felt like I was shedding my skin. I no longer fit in. My truck rattled down the highway, the radio hissing with static, and I didn't stop until the gas needle hit empty. This led me to Eaton, a city big enough to swallow me whole, all concrete and noise compared to the quiet fields I had left behind. I had $50, a duffel bag, and a fire in my chest that wouldn't die out. I wasn't sure what I was chasing, but I knew I couldn't go back. The first few days I slept in my truck, windows cracked, parked behind a diner where the cooks didn't care as long as I was gone by dawn. I woke up with a stiff neck, aching, and washed up in a gas station sink, splashing cold water until I felt alive again. I needed to find a job fast, so I walked into every place with a help wanted sign. My boots scuffed sidewalks littered with gum wrappers and cigarette butts. Most people glanced at my worn jeans and said, "We'll call you." They never did. Finally, I landed a job at a warehouse, loading boxes onto trucks for $10 an hour. It was brutal. My hands burned after the first shift, tears welling up as I lugged crates of auto parts or whatever else they were shipping. The foreman, a guy named Rick with a voice like gravel, barked orders nonstop. "Move it, newbie!" he'd shout, and I gritted my teeth, picturing James's smirk every time I wanted to quit. I reminded myself that I wasn't as strong as him yet, but I was damn sure not going to let that stop me. Nights were the worst. I crashed in a cheap motel room I rented by the week. The walls were so thin I could hear the neighbor coughing. I lay there staring at water stains on the ceiling, thinking about Lily. Her face floated in my memory, those soft eyes, that laugh. I wondered if she was happy with James. Then I heard Mom's voice belittling me, pictured James posing like he owned the world. I flipped over, punching the pillow until the thought faded. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. One day I saw a flyer stapled to a pole near the warehouse. Evening classes, learn a trade, build a future. It was at the local college a few blocks away. I was never strong in school, barely graduated, but something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the word future. I signed up for a basic computer course, figuring it couldn't hurt. On the first night, I sat in a room full of tired people like me, all hunched over old computers. The teacher, Mr. Hayes, was a skinny guy with glasses slipping down his nose. "You don't have to be smart," he said. "You just have to show up." I could do that. That's where I met Sarah. She sat in the back row, typing away like she was born with a keyboard in her hands, short auburn hair, freckles on her nose, and a smile that didn't seem forced. We paired up for some silly assignment, creating a spreadsheet. I stumbled, cursing under my breath. "Relax," she said, leaning over to fix my mess. "It's not rocket science." Her fingers flew across the keys and I just watched, feeling like a kid who had wandered into the wrong place. After class, we went to the diner across the street. Black coffee for me, milk and sugar for her. She told me she grew up in Eaton, worked as a cashier, but wanted more. "I'm not staying behind that register forever," she said, stirring her cup. "What about you?" I didn't know how to answer, just mumbled that I was trying to figure things out, and she nodded like she understood. We started hanging out after class in the evenings, first talking about the course, then about nonsense, movies, the best cheap diners in town, and she had a way of making me forget the pain I carried inside. Work stabilized. Rick stopped yelling so much, even patted me on the back one day, saying, "You're not so bad, kid." I saved enough to move out of the motel into a tiny apartment, peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. Sarah came over one evening with pizza, laughing at my bare place. "You need a chair or something," she teased, sitting cross-legged on the floor. We ate straight out of the box, grease smearing our fingers, and I felt something ease in my chest. Not love, not yet, but a ray of light in the darkness. Then came the breakthrough. A guy at the warehouse mentioned his cousin from a startup was looking for help. Some tech company developing an app or gadgets, I wasn't sure. They need someone willing to work hard, he said. I showed up in my cleanest shirt, palms sweaty, and talked to a skinny guy in a hoodie named Tim. He asked what I could do, and I said, "Whatever you teach me." Apparently that was enough. He hired me as a gopher, running errands, hauling equipment, whatever. It was better, and I got to watch the smart guys write code and argue about things I barely understood. I soaked it all in, asking questions when they let me. By the end of my first year in Eton, I was no longer the guy who had left Harriston. My hands were calloused, I had a few $100s in the bank, and I had Sarah. Not that she was mine, but she was there, steady as a heartbeat. One evening, walking her home after class, she took my hand so naturally it seemed like it meant nothing. I froze, then squeezed her hand back, my pulse racing. "You're doing well, Alvin," she said, looking at me. "Don't stop." I had no intention of stopping. One day I had lost everything and I wasn't going to let that happen again. But driving home, the city lights twinkling overhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. I felt it, and Eton no longer seemed like a maze. Over time, it became home. Step by step, I lived there for several years, and life found a rhythm: work, Sarah, and that quiet fire inside that kept pushing me. That startup job I stumbled into was no longer just errands. Tim, the skinny guy in the hoodie who hired me, started trusting me with more. Testing apps, working with numbers, even sitting in on meetings where they tossed ideas around like ping pong balls. I didn't understand half of it at first, but I listened, took notes on napkins, and figured it out. It turned out I had a knack for seeing the big picture, how pieces fit together into something people might like. Tim noticed it one day. He pulled me aside, coffee breath wafting. "Alvin, you're wasting your time hauling boxes. We're expanding. New office, investors, work. I need someone to manage operations. You in?" I blinked, expecting a catch, but he was serious. Operations, managing chaos, shipments, schedules, budgets. I had never done it before, but I had seen Rick manage the warehouse like a drill sergeant. I could learn. "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding. "I'm in." So it began. I climbed the ladder step by step, clawing my way up. The company grew fast. The app we created became popular with students, then in offices, then overseas. I worked late, slept less, and loved it. Sarah was with me through it all. We had been dating for a year when I asked her to move in with me. Nothing fancy, just my little apartment, now with a couch instead of a single mattress. She said yes, bringing over a box of books and a coffee maker, smiling like we had won something. A year later, I proposed. No grand gesture, just us on the fire escape, city lights twinkling below, and a ring I had saved up for 6 months. She cried, nodded, and that was that. We got married at the courthouse, her in a white dress she found on sale, me in a suit that pinched at the shoulders. No crowd, no fuss, just a couple of friends from work and her sister taking pictures. I liked that it was quiet. Soon after that, she got pregnant, and 9 months later we had Mia, tiny, loud, with Sarah's freckles already dotting her nose. 2 years later, Ethan was born, chubby cheeks and fists. I came home exhausted, and they climbed all over me, laughing, and suddenly the day didn't seem so heavy. By then, I was the CEO. Yeah, me, Alvin from Harriston, the guy who stacked boards, now running a company worth millions. Tim stepped back to tinker with code, and the board chose me to lead. I didn't flaunt it, kept my old truck and the same boots, let Sarah handle the public stuff, interviews, fancy dinners. She was good at it, charming, with a quick laugh, and I stayed behind the scenes, making sure the machine ran smoothly. We bought a house, not a mansion, just a brick house with a yard for the kids, but we didn't tell anyone who didn't need to know. I liked that it was a secret. It felt safer that way. But the past didn't disappear. It crept up late at night when the house was quiet and Sarah's breath was soft beside me. I saw Lily's face, heard Mom's voice belittling me, pictured James posing like he owned the world. I held a box in the closet, old photos, a letter from Mom I never opened, A picture of Lily and me at the fair, her head on my shoulder. Sometimes I took it out, looked at it, then put it away again. Sarah caught me once, asked what it was. Nothing, I lied, and she let it go, but her eyes said she knew. We were happy, me, Sarah, the kids, but I wasn't whole yet. I built this life brick by brick, and it was good, but there was a hole where Harriston used to be. I didn't miss them, not really, but I wondered if they ever thought about me, if Lily regretted it, if Mom cared. She had lost a son. I suppressed it, focusing on Mia's drawings or Ethan's babbles, but it never went away. Then the call came. I was in the office, papers strewn across the desk, when my phone rang. Unknown number, Harriston area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Alvin," said a voice, gravelly, familiar. "It's Uncle Pete, your dad's brother. Your dad passed away. Heart attack. Funeral's on Saturday." My throat tightened. Dad wasn't perfect, quiet, let Mom run everything, but he never cut me down like she did. He taught me to fish, fixed my bike when I crashed it. He never stood up for me, not once. I wondered if he tried in the end. I mumbled something about being there and hung up, staring at the wall. Sarah found me like that when she came home, the kids trailing behind her. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting Ethan down. I told her, my voice steady. "You don't have to go," she said, placing her hand on mine. But I shook my head. "I do. Not for Mom, not for James or Lily. Maybe for Dad, or for myself. I need to see this through." The next night I couldn't sleep. I slipped out of bed and got that box again. Mom's letter was still unopened, the postmark old. I tore it open, hands shaking. "Alvin, come home. We miss you. James and Lily are in a tough spot. Help us." No apologies, nothing, just demands, as always. I crumpled it, tossed it in the trash. They had no right to need me now. The next morning I packed a bag, a suit, a tie, nothing fancy. Sarah hugged me at the door, Mia clinging to my leg. "Be careful," she said, her eyes searching mine. "I will," I promised, driving away from Eton. The kids waved from the porch and I felt the old pain stirring. Harriston was calling me back and I wasn't sure what I would find, but I knew one thing. I was no longer the broken guy they remembered. The drive back to Harriston felt like crossing a line I had drawn in the dirt many years ago. My truck barreled down the highway, fields flashing by the window, and with each mile the knot in my stomach tightened. I hadn't been back since I left at 23. The exhaust pipe spat dust, and now I was 35 with a life they knew nothing about. The radio crackled with some old country song about lost love, and I turned it off. I didn't need the reminder. I rolled into town late Friday evening, the sky gray and heavy like it was about to rain. Harriston hadn't changed much. The same sagging porches, the same gas station with a broken sign. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, a low brick building with a flickering neon sign. The clerk barely glanced at me as I paid cash for a room. The bed creaked, the sheets smelled of bleach, but it would do. I dumped my bag, stared at myself in the cracked mirror, wrinkles around the eyes, hair graying. I was no longer that guy, but I could still feel him bubbling inside. On Saturday morning, I put on the suit, dark, simple, nothing fancy, and drove to the church. It was the same church I had gone to as a kid, white paint peeling, steeple leaning like it was tired. Cars lined the parking lot, people in black milling about, voices hushed. I parked in the back, took a deep breath, and got out. Heads turned, old neighbors, blacksmiths I hadn't seen in years, but no one said anything. I was a ghost to them now. Inside, the pews were filled, the air thick with flowers and whispers. I sat near the back, next to some guy I vaguely remembered from school. Then I saw them, Mom, James, Lily up front, like royalty receiving guests. Mom's hair was gray, pulled back into a tight bun, her face just as sharp as ever. James sat broad-shouldered, suit straining at the seams, looking bored. And Lily, she was thinner, eyes dull, hands folded in her lap. Time hadn't been kind to them, but I still didn't feel sorry for them. A woman leaned over to me, Mrs. Carter, who taught me in Sunday school. "They stuck you back here, huh? Typical Margaret," she whispered. I shrugged, said nothing. I could feel Mom's eyes scanning the room, but she didn't see me. James muttered something to Lily, and she nodded lifelessly, like a doll. They thought I was nobody, some broken failure crawling back for scraps. Let them think that. The service began, the pastor talking about Dad's life, how he worked on the farm, loved his family. I barely listened. Dad was quiet, always in Mom's shadow, but he taught me to fish, fixed my bike when I crashed it. He never stood up for me, not once. I wondered if he tried in the end. Then Uncle Pete stood up, cleared his throat, holding a paper. "Alvin, your dad wanted you to read this." Heads turned, a murmur rippled through the room. Mom's face twitched, James scowled, Lily's eyes lifted. I stood, legs steady, and walked down the aisle. It felt like a mile long, each step echoing on the wooden floor. Pete handed me the paper, patted my shoulder, and I turned to face the crowd. Dad's shaky, slanted handwriting looked up at me. "To my boy Alvin," I began, my voice quiet but clear. "I wasn't the father you deserved. I let things happen that shouldn't have. But I watched you from afar, heard about your life, your work. You made something out of nothing, and I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I never said it before." My throat tightened, but I continued. "You're stronger than I ever was. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The room was silent. I looked up. Mom's lips were a thin line. James fidgeted. Lily stared at her hands. I could have stopped there, left it at that, but something in me snapped. "I brought my family here today," I said, looking towards the back. "Sarah, kids, come on up." There was a rustle, and Sarah walked down the aisle, Mia and Ethan following her. She was in a simple black dress, elegant, her hair swept back, and the kids looked like little adults, Mia in a skirt, Ethan in a tie. I nodded to myself. They came to me, Sarah's hand touching mine, and I turned to the crowd. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom's face paled like she had seen a ghost. James's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between me and the kids. Lily blinked slowly as if waking up. The rest of the church buzzed with whispers and gasps, but I didn't care. I folded Dad's letter, put it in my pocket, and said, "That's all." Then I led my family back to our seats, Sarah's fingers intertwined with mine. Mia whispered, "You did good, Dad." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Hymns, prayers, people filing past Dad's casket. I stayed in my seat, watching Mom twist her handkerchief, James stare at the floor, Lily steal glances at me. They didn't say a word, but I could feel it. Their world was tilting, cracking. When it was all over, people spilled out onto the street, the air damp with the rain that had finally started. I stood under the awning, Sarah beside me, the kids playing with a pebble they found. I thought that would be the end of it, just a glance, a moment, and then I'd leave. But then I saw them coming, Mom, James, Lily weaving through the crowd, faces I hadn't seen in 12 years. My pulse quickened and I squared my shoulders. Whatever they wanted to say, I was ready. The rain pounded on the church awning, counting down the time. I stood there, Sarah beside me, the kids splashing in puddles a few feet away, the crowd thinning, people rushing to their cars. But I didn't move. My eyes were locked on Mom, James, and Lily making their way through the crowd. Their faces were tense, like they had rehearsed this. It had been 12 years since I left, and here they were, about to say something I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My hands clenched in my pockets, but I held my head high. They wouldn't see me flinch. Mom reached us first, her black dress damp at the hem, eyes just as sharp as ever. "Alvin," she said, her voice clipped like she was calling me to dinner. "You should have told us you were coming." No hello, nothing. Just that old tone like I had inconvenienced her. James loomed behind her, arms crossed, rain clinging to his hair. Lily hung back, clutching an umbrella, looking smaller than I remembered. "I said I was coming," I replied, holding steady. "Didn't think you'd care." She pursed her lips. Of course we care. Your family. She glanced at Sarah and the kids, then back at me, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't understand. I let the question hang, the rain drumming between us. Sarah stepped closer, her hand firm on mine. Is this your life? She asked finally. Yeah, I said. I built it myself without your help. James scoffed, breaking the silence. What's that supposed to mean? You show up after years, act like a big shot, read Dad's letter like you're better than us. His voice had that same edge he used to cut me with when we were kids. Where were you, huh? Where were you when you left me? I countered, looking him in the eye. In the cold while you took everything I had. He flinched just for a moment, but I saw it. Mom intervened, waving her hand dismissively. That's not fair, Alvin. We did what was best for Lily, for the family. You were young, chasing dreams that didn't pan out. James was strong, reliable. He had a future. James stepped forward and I laughed, harsh and empty. You pushed him into it, I said, looking at Mom. You made me believe I was never good enough. Told Lily I'd never amount to anything. Lily spoke up then, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you, Alvin. Your mom, she said you'd leave forever, that you didn't care. I was scared. Her eyes were wet, but I couldn't tell if it was tears or rain. I looked at her, really looked. The girl I loved was still there, buried under years of regret, but it didn't soften me. You could have called, I said. Could have waited 3 weeks. You chose James. Live with it. She looked down, water dripping from her chin. James fidgeted, jaw clenched. So you're some big rich guy now, huh? Come back to rub it in our faces, he said, trying to sound nonchalant. I didn't come to rub it in, I replied evenly. I built a company from scratch. I didn't come to gloat. I came for Dad. You made me this way. Mom's eyes widened for a second before she smoothed it over. Well, she said, forcing a smile, that's impressive. We always knew you had potential, didn't we, James? He grunted, unconvinced. Maybe you could help us out. Things are tough. James lost his job, the farm's barely hanging on. Family helps family. There it was, the ask. Same old Mom turning a knife into a handshake. For a moment I saw red. Memories flashed. Her voice in the kitchen. You're just you. James's smirk when he put that ring on Lily. I was leaving. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly. You didn't help me when I was sleeping in my truck, eating gas station sandwiches. Where were you, huh? Oh, right, writing letters, begging after you'd already cut me off. I cut her off. This isn't the start, Mom, but I'm ending it. You made your choices. I made mine. We're done. I turned, nodded to Sarah. She called the kids and we headed to the truck. Mom's voice followed me. Alvin, wait. We're sorry. We didn't know. I kept walking, the rain soaking my suit, Sarah's hand in mine, James shouting something, probably cursing, but it blended with the storm. Lily didn't say another word, and I didn't look back to check. The truck door slammed shut behind us, Mia giggling about her wet socks, Ethan asking, Can we get burgers? Sarah squeezed my knee, silently giving me space to breathe as we drove away. I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Mom standing there, arms limp, James kicking the dirt, Lily under the umbrella, a shadow. They looked small, lost, like the rain had washed away all the power they once held over me. I didn't feel good about it, not happy, not angry, just free, like the weight I had carried for so long had finally slipped off. Dad, are those people mad at you? Mia piped up from the back seat. No, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. They were just surprised. It's been a long time. She nodded, satisfied, and started chattering with Ethan. Sarah looked at me, her eyes soft. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, and this time it was true. The road stretched out before us, Harriston fading in the distance, and I knew I would never go back. They saw me, saw what I had created, and that was enough. The rain followed us out of Harriston, streaks on the windshield as I drove. The rain followed us out of Harriston, streaks on the windshield as I drove. The kids chattered in the back seat. Sarah sat quietly beside me, her hand resting on my leg. I watched the road, lights flashing through the rain, but my mind was still back at that church. Lily's face, Mom's eyes, James's scowl, the umbrella drooping like a wilted flower. I didn't say much, just let the miles roll by. The hum of the engine filled the space where words didn't fit. We stopped at a diner an hour down the road, some joint with a flickering neon sign in the window. The kids were hungry, and Ethan had been begging for burgers since we left. Inside, it smelled like fried food and coffee, the kind of place where the waitress calls you Han and the booths are patched with duct tape. Mia sat next to me, swinging her legs, while Ethan climbed into Sarah's lap, smearing ketchup on his shirt. "You're gonna be all dirty in 5 minutes, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair, and he grinned, mouth full of fries, watching them laugh over nonsense. I felt something ease in my chest. This was mine. No one could take it away. Sarah caught my eye across the table, her smile soft. "You're quiet," she said, wiping Ethan's hands with a napkin. "Still thinking about it?" "Yeah," I admitted, poking at my fries. "But not about them, really. Just that it's over." She nodded like she understood and didn't press. That was her way, knowing when to give me space. We finished, paid the check, and piled back into the truck. The rain had tapered off to a drizzle, the sky turning purple as night crept in. The kids dozed off halfway home, heads lolling against each other, and Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, almost asleep. I didn't reply, just squeezed her hand. But it stuck with me. Pulling into Eaton, driving up to our house, I felt like I had landed after a long fall. The house glowed warm and brick solid. I carried Ethan inside, his little arms wrapped around my neck, while Sarah took Mia. We tucked them into their beds, surrounded by toys and crayon drawings, and I stood there for a moment, watching them breathe. They didn't know what Harriston meant, didn't carry that burden, and I had made damn sure of it. Downstairs, Sarah made us coffee, and we sat on the couch, mugs steaming. The silence was thick, but not heavy. "You gonna tell me what happened?" she asked, tucking her legs under her. I told her about Dad's letter, how it hit me, how Mom begged. James sneered. Lily just stood there. I told her about the rain, about walking away, how it didn't feel like a victory, just a letting go. "You wanted to forgive them," she said, sipping her coffee. "No," I said finally. "Not because I hate them. I don't hate them anymore. They just don't get a piece of this. What we have, it's ours. They lost their chance." She smiled, small but genuine, and set her mug down. "Then that's it," she said, leaning into me. We sat like that for a while, the TV flickering with some late-night show we weren't watching, and I felt the last knot in my stomach unwind. I had faced them, stood tall, and walked away. It was done. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. The kids were still asleep, the house quiet except for the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen. I went to the closet, pulled out that old box I'd kept for too long. Photos spilled out. James and me fishing, Mom at a picnic, Lily laughing at the fair. I flipped through them, expecting a sting, but it wasn't there. Just memories, faded like the paper. Then I saw it. Mom's crumpled letter, the one I had tossed in Harriston. I pulled it out, smoothed it, read it again. "Come home. We miss you. James and Lily are in a tough spot. Help us." Same old song, but there was something else tucked in the envelope. A small note I had missed. Dad's shaky handwriting, just like in the letter. "Alvin, I left you the old watch. It's not much, but it's yours. I should have given you more. Forgive me." My breath caught. The watch, old, silver, the one he wore every day. I hadn't seen it at the funeral, thought Mom had kept it for herself. Turns out he had hidden it for me. I sat there, turning the note over in my hands. Dad never fought for me in life, but he tried in the end. It wasn't enough to make up for everything, but it was something. I tucked the note back in, shoved the box under the bed. Not thrown away, just out of sight. Maybe I'd get the watch out later, maybe not. It didn't matter now. Sarah came downstairs, hair tousled, robe loosely tied. "You're up early," she said, pouring coffee. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, and this time it was true. Want to take the kids to the park later? She smiled. Only if you promise to push the swings. Deal, I said. And that day we did just that. We parked on the street, the sun breaking through the clouds, Mia squealing as I pushed her high, Ethan chasing a butterfly, Sarah laughing on the bench. I caught my reflection in a puddle, older, steadier, the guy who had made it through. Harrison was far behind, a shadow I no longer needed to chase. I had built this family, this home, this life, and it was enough. Driving home, the kids singing off-key in the back seat, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were my future, not that town, not those people. I smiled, small but genuine, and turned on the radio. The road ahead was clear, and I was good with that. So that's my story, how I lost everything, built it back up, and found my way. It took a lot of miles and a few scars to get here, but I'd do it all over again for what I have now. How about you? Ever had to walk away from something or someone to find what's real? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this story with friends. See you in the next story.